Hello everyone, and welcome to the Future and Careers podcast. My name's Joe, and I'll be your host for this episode, which features Dr. Judith Clarke from Stony Brook University in the USA. Judy and her colleague, Dr. Wendy Todd, are pioneering new teaching methods by incorporating traditional, Indigenous knowledge into geoscience courses. They hope that this will increase the participation of Indigenous students within the field of geoscience. In this conversation, we spoke about the differing ways in which Indigenous communities and Western scientists think about the world. We spoke about the importance of values such as respect, compassion, and reciprocity, and we spoke about Judy's experiences travelling the world as a professional athlete. Judy and I had a rich and open conversation, and her passion for helping other people really shines through. So without further ado, here's Dr. Judith Clarke on the Future and Careers podcast. Hi Judy, welcome to the Future and Careers podcast. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for this invitation.
You're very welcome. So your project looks at combining traditional Indigenous knowledge into the field of geoscience. I wonder if you could just give us a quick overview of the differences between traditional Indigenous knowledge and a more Western view of science.
Western science is looking at understanding, and it's a different relationship when you think about actually living within your science. So if I'm looking at it from a traditional perspective, my understanding of the plant determines if I eat. Understanding the animals, if the water quality is, changing the salmon run and we don't have an abundance of salmon, then that actually impacts the health and wellness of my community. So there's a very different level of investment and curiosity and depth in it than I have a research question and I'm trying to answer it. That's very narrow. And I may throw out a lot of information that I don't think is relevant because it's not answering the question that I'm interested in. My agenda is to just understand, get my data, collect my samples, have an understanding of it. And my curiosity stays in my head versus my heart and my soul.
And so in your project, do you look at ways that traditional knowledge can change or improve Western science?
Absolutely. How do we create pathways, open doors? Because the way that you change thinking is you have to look at the table where discovery and decisions are made, and you have to make that more inclusive, equitable, and diverse. That's how you start to change science. So as science diversifies and there's considerations, even when you're doing data collection, like sometimes in field research, there may be a research team that goes into Indigenous communities and does collection of samples. It may be animals, it may be plants, it may be soil, maybe water. Number one, did you ask permission? Because again, going back to Indigenous communities are connected to their land and their water. So if you take from the land, you take from the water, you're taking from that community. And so that level of respect, letting the community know, not just like my funder allowed me to come here and I talked to the state, or I may have talked to the country to have permission. It's like, only person that can give you permission in Indigenous land is Indigenous communities. So I think the way that we grow science to be the very best science that we can possibly be putting forward is you have to think about, whose voice is not in this conversation. And if I'm going into an Indigenous community or land, who did I talk to? What permissions did I get? And how can I help that community if there's something that I can provide for them in a way that they'll reciprocate and maybe provide data and resources for me? And it doesn't even have to mean that you're going in the community. I mean, you could be going on a border community because, Indigenous communities don't have a line where their community ends and where, another community begins. It's really kind of that tree, that river, that area. So quite frankly, in Indigenous community, it's Mother Earth. Indigenous communities tend to view, rightfully so, that, we are guests on this planet. And so any researcher, it doesn't really matter where you go, you should educate yourself on the culture and the considerations. And just quite frankly, just being a compassionate researcher, it's better research.
Yeah, and so these principles of respect and reciprocity and compassion are really beneficial for research. I guess they're also beneficial just for people in general, just to live your life by those principles.
The more you live these as core values, really and truly, the better researcher you are. You have a level of authenticity. If this is a part of your core values and who you are as a researcher and a person, then there's your authentic self gives off energy. Then and you start to live that, then you know what? It starts, that's what you do also in the field. But it shouldn't be like, oh, when I'm in the field, I should act like this. No, it should, how you act in the field is how you should act at all times. So it really should become your persona and the core of who you are as a compassionate and effective researcher, scientist, educator, mentor, and so on.
And so I'm interested in your journey as a researcher and an educator. So how did you get involved in this project?
So I've always done some level of breaking down barriers. So when Wendy and I first started working together, she had been doing a lot of work within her community up in Alaska. And so it just aligned. And so that's how I started working with the Alaska Native communities, as well as with Indian Nation across the U.S. I'm not formally affiliated with a tribe, but I do have Cherokee and Choctaw in my blood. And so some of this is, I just have to say, it's my responsibility. I've been blessed with a lot of gifts, and those gifts require and demand responsibility. So that is, I think on Earth, we all are kind of charged with something, and that seems to be what the Creator placed on me is that I'm a convener and also someone that breaks down barriers. Maybe that's why I was a hurdler.
Yeah, because you don't just break barriers; you jump over them as well, or you used to. How did that experience of competing at such a high level and winning silver at the Olympics, how has that impacted your approach to your professional life, but also your personal life?
So one of the things about track and field is just a low cost sport, which means that any country can have a track team. So, and growing up, I've always loved the travel and culture. And of course, I grew up poor and I didn't have an opportunity to do that. And I always thought, if I ever had an opportunity to do that, I would travel all over the world. Well, because of track, I was able to travel all over the world. And the very first thing I would do when I would go into a different country is I would immediately throw myself in my room and I would go either to the market or the museum or the aquarium or the zoo. And those are the four places I always went, and I would know what the culture was. I would know the foods, the spices, how people would barter. I've always been kind of a hoarder of culture and experiences. And so I love that. I just love that. So I just maybe have an old soul, but I just love culture. I love history. And I love how, the past, the present, and the future are so interconnected. And from a very young age, I've always understood that. Where I am right now is I'm just doing it without my tracksuit on.
And so, having traveled all around the world and met all these different people and seen all these different cultures, has that affected the way you view life and how you approach life?
So in my life, this beautiful earth is very small. And so it is really, there's nothing that happens, good, bad, or indifferent. There's nothing that happens that doesn't directly or indirectly affect us. So that's a level of stewardship and responsibility that makes anyone that can embrace this, you're very different in the way that you make decisions. And so it doesn't really matter how hard one person's working if we're not working in a level of concert. So the same way, understanding, and one thing I appreciate about technology is as we go back and we're looking at technologies and we're carbon dating things, whatever, we are realizing that, what if we're not the smartest species? And can you wrap your mind around the fact that your ancestors may have been smarter than you? If our ancestors were smarter than us, then we have to embrace Indigenous knowledge, right? So what if we're not the smartest species, or our generation is not as clever as our ancestors? How humbling, but how exciting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely loads that we can still learn from the people that came before us and these Indigenous communities and the knowledge that they have. I wonder if you have any tips for students, maybe particularly Indigenous students, who might be wanting to venture into the field of science as a career path.
Absolutely. One of the things that we found in our research, like it's really important, particularly for Indigenous young students, if you don't see yourself, then it feels like where you want to be isn't welcoming. So looking for where you can find a researcher, or someone that is in education or policy, or someone that you can just interview them. Just start off with that. It's like someone you're like, oh my goodness, I love what this person is doing and they remind me of me, but I don't know how, from where I am, how I would get to where they are. And understanding that there's no straight path, and you can absolutely make big, huge mistakes and still get there. It doesn't matter if it takes you 4 years or 6 years, because you're going to be 6 years from now, you're going to be that age anyway. So you might as well do something that's going to be fulfilling. I think the other piece of that is it's so incredibly important that Indigenous voices are driving science and research and medicine and our understanding of the world. It's so important that Indigenous voices are strong within that ecosystem of what we call research or what we call education and so on. So I would say, for young children and students, there is a path, there is a way. I think we all have a role in there, but what's most important is getting people to the table, breaking down those barriers, opening doors, keeping young people affirmed on their pathway. That's what's most important.
Yeah, that's good advice, I think. So I've just got 3 quick fire questions to ask you, just sort of to get to know you a bit more as a person. So the first one is, what's your favorite song?
Oh my gosh, what's my favorite song?
Putting you on the spot.
Wow.
Or favorite artist, if song is too hard.
I'm going through a change right now. So who I would have said before, I'm kind of going back to some old music that really talks about inspiration. So like I like Nina Simone, but that's probably not what I would recommend young people listen to.
Cool. And are you more of a morning person or are you more of a night owl?
I'm a morning person.
And the last one, if you could be any animal, what animal would you be and why?
If I could be any animal, I think if I could be any animal, I would probably be an eagle.
Nice.
First of all, I'm protected. That helps. And it just represents to me this incredible, beautiful, regal way, within the animal system. If anything else, other than that, I'd be a jellyfish.
That's a good answer. Well, it's been so good to have you on the podcast. I've really loved chatting to you. We could have gone on for hours, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's been well, there we go. That was Dr. Judy Clarke on the Future and Careers podcast. This conversation was a pleasure to record, and I could have spoken to Judy for hours. She had so many insightful things to say, and I think that the work she's doing is incredibly important, and that we could all learn a lot from how these Indigenous communities understand the world around them. So thanks again, Judy. If you want to find out more about Judy and her research, you can head over to the Future and Careers website, where you can read her article if you haven't done so already. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything that we spoke about on this podcast, please feel free to get in touch with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just search for Future and Careers and we'd love to hear from you. Well, that's all for now, and I'll be with you again very shortly on the next episode of the Future and Careers podcast.